Well, the report is basically arguing that there's been obviously a tremendous amount of progress, especially around reaching the Millennium Development Goals, and obviously increased progress on human development, but that this progress may not be sustained in light of the resurging number of crises, that it be conflicts, natural disaster, and that therefore it's really important that policies are designed and supported to ensure that the gains that have been achieved in the last 20 years are not reversed or altered. The report argues that there are sets of policies that can really contribute to ensuring that we don't fall back and we continue progressing on the human development front. And this includes ensuring that we have access to basic social services for all citizens, to ensure that we have protection systems in place, especially for the unemployed and the elderly people that are more vulnerable. It also calls for full employment, so not only gaining, in terms of economic, but gaining for the entire society, because unemployment has disastrous effect on social cohesion and impact a country's performance overall. And finally, it calls for a better global governance to respond to what are global crises. I think, there's a global framework around human development, which is basically what the agreement that was reached in Rio in the Sustainable Development Rio +20 conference 2 years ago, which is basically that all countries need to bring development on a sustainable path and ensure that there's this social cohesion within the countries. And I think the region is very much has the same type of challenges, maybe less so because the level of human development across the region are much higher than in many other regions. But there is issues around sustainability, there's issues around, impact of disasters, and we've seen that recently with the challenges with the flood in the neighboring countries of, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia. And we need to ensure that those countries build the systems to respond to this. Furthermore, I think in our region, and especially in Southern Europe and in the Balkans, we have a big issue of unemployment and youth unemployment that needs to be tackled. Well, I think the recent floods last May, and there were again floods, as you know, last week in Bosnia-Herzegovina, really demonstrates that in a matter of hours, gains that had been made over years in terms of infrastructure can be just disappearing. And that it's absolutely critical for countries to be prepared, to have emergency responses in place, to have their citizens aware of the type of disaster that they can encounter. It also shows that, unfortunately, those that are most affected, and it's very much a point in the report, are those groups that are most vulnerable. People that live in floodplains, for example, are universally affected. So we expect that in next year's ranking, we will see a decline in the Human Development Index for those countries, and that it will take a while for those countries to get back to the level of human development that they had, especially in the specific areas that were affected by the floods. As I've said earlier, what is critical is that all citizens have access to basic social services, that it be in health, education, access to information, etc. Obviously, there needs to be very strong protection systems in place, especially for the most vulnerable. I've already mentioned the unemployed. And in this region, this is a critical group of population to address. And finally, to have policies in place to ensure that these are really supporting the most vulnerable. You know, Montenegro is at a threshold. It's actually just below the very high development, and it's, I believe, would be fairly easy to move up. Now, you know, maybe this response is better given to you by the president later this morning. But certainly from the UN perspective, as I've said, Montenegro needs to continue investing in social protection, especially of ethnic minorities such as the Roma. Needs to have policies that are promoting employment, especially for the youth. Really also look at the critical cycles in, you know, from school to work and from work to retirement, where people are mostly vulnerable. But I think there's been a huge amount of progress. And the accession agenda of Montenegro, in line with the EU acquis, is a very, very good base to bring Montenegro further up.